All right, good morning. How are we doing, guys? You cold? All right. It's fantastic. Really glad to have you all here this morning. Thank you for weathering the cold. Those of you who haven't weathered the cold are like, dude, I know it's on Facebook Live, so I'm just going to hang out in my Snuggie. That's cool. Glad you're joining us. This morning, we're jumping into a new sermon series, The Scroll of the 12. Oh. The Scroll of the 12. Maybe turn to a neighbor and get, what in the world is the Scroll of the 12? I thought we taught the Bible here at St. John's. What do you think the Scroll of the 12 is? Have a little conversation with a neighbor. Is that even in the Apocrypha? We don't do that at St. John's, do we? Oh my goodness. All right, the Scroll of the 12. The Scroll of the 12. Little cheeky, there's a little bit of like clickbait in the sermon series title, The Scroll of the 12. But actually, the Scroll of the 12 is in the Bible. It is. It is. Now, in our Old Testaments, we don't encounter it as the Scroll of the 12. What we tend to refer to these 12 books as is what we call the Minor Prophets. The Minor Prophets, a collection of 12 books in the Old Testament that are smaller in size than the so-called major prophets, which are larger in size. So this would be like, the major prophets would be like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, right? They're like dozens of chapters long, and it would take a while to read and an even longer time to try to comprehend or understand. The minor prophets are a little bit less intimidating to read because they're shorter. They are as long as 14 chapters or as few as just one. Often just 3 chapters. So if you're feeling smug and you're like, I'm going to read the Old Testament today, and you're like, I'll pick one of the small books so I can do it all quickly in one day and feel really good and be like, yeah, I read a whole book of the Old Testament today. No big deal. NBD. Like, it's just what I do. You might turn to one of these and then be like, why did I choose this? I don't understand anything, and I feel more stupid than I ever did before. I know I'm going to go back to the New Testament, read the Gospels, or one of the short letters that, I can read in about 15 minutes and feel smug again. All right, so that tends to be our relationship with what we call the minor prophets. And the minor prophets exist, actually they're organized in a particular way. Usually, our Christian Bibles are organized by sort of genre that we understand that book to be, and then generally from biggest to smallest, right? So we have a system of categorization. So we, for instance, have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and they're organized accordingly. Then we sometimes organize things by author and then size. So we have what's called the Pauline epistles. Those books of the New Testament written by the Apostle Paul. And it starts with Romans and ends with Philemon, right? And those are biggest to smallest with a little bit of grouping around. So like 1st and 2nd Timothy are found, next to one another, even though it's not quite size order, as it were. And so the same thing we generally do with the Old Testament. We take the books that we call historical books. And that would be sort of Genesis through 2nd Chronicles. And we organize them somewhat chronologically about what the sort of topic of that book or what the history of that book happens to be. Somewhat biggest to smallest. And when we kind of dice in some stuff, if like something kind of fits but it doesn't fit, and where does that go? We kind of slide it in where it seems to make the most sense to us. And so that's what we call the historical books. And then we move from what we call the historical books to sort of poetry and wisdom literature. So that's like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and we organize those according to their genre and then according to their size. And then we move from poetry and wisdom literature to what we call prophecy or prophets. And we've got the big prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. We include Daniel in that. And then we've got the minor prophets, which are basically a guy called Hosea all the way to Malachi, the first Italian prophet. No, Malachi. Malachi. And, but they are not organized biggest to smallest. They're not organized biggest to smallest. They're actually organized according to the way they are in the Jewish Bible. Now, our Old Testament contains the same content as the Jewish Bible. Obviously, the Jewish Bible doesn't have the New Testament, right? All right? It's got all of the same books. However, it's organized slightly differently. And so we hear Jesus talk about his Bible, talks about the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, or the writings. If you were to pick up a copy of what we call the Tanakh, it's just basically a Jewish Bible, our Old Testament. Torah is the law, first 5 books, right? The N sound is for the Nevim, which is the prophets, and then the Ketuvim, that's the K sound, Tanakh. The Ketuvim, which is the writings. And the minor prophets all exist in one scroll. Isaiah's a scroll, Jeremiah's a scroll, Ezekiel's a scroll. And the 12 minor prophets are in a single scroll. The scroll of the 12, anciently and historically. And so they're organized in a particular way. And I'm going to elaborate on the particular way that they're organized. This morning is really an introduction to all of this. And what we want to do as we move through the scroll of the 12 is understand them in a sort of survey sort of way. Because remember, we have these habits at St. John's. There's lots of spiritual habits. There's lots of spiritual disciplines that people can have in their life. But we just want to highlight 6 that we think are foundational and really helpful and a good starting place. And that's to have a life of relationship with God through Christ. And that personal relationship features Bible reading and prayer. Prayer, we're learning how to talk to God, and reading the Bible, we're learning to hear God speak to us and to recognize his voice. But the Bible is a mysterious book, right? And no one got good at anything by ignoring it. It takes time. But one of my jobs is to equip and resource you to be able to read the Bible for yourself and not be totally disorientated by it. My job is to be like a Sherpa, going through the mountains, be like, that's a false peak, that's the one we're going to, we're not going over there, that's bad news. Right? That's one of my roles. And then we have fellowship and evangelism. Fellowship is just doing stuff like reading the Bible and praying with other people who are Christians. Evangelism isn't whipping out my creed and saying it's bigger than yours and you need to agree with me and we'll argue till you do. Right? It's like, this is my life of faith in Christ. And I'm just including you in on it because we're friends, because we're family. And I'm not going to exclude you from something that's precious to me because I care about you and want to be in relationship with you. Not because I'm trying to get another notch on my evangelistic belt. Right? It's just including other people in our life of faith, irrespective of whether or not they're Christians already or not. And then fasting and generosity. What's our relationship with stuff? Can we be content with less? Can we learn to discipline our bodies to our minds and our wills? It's being aligned to God's mind and God's will. And can we be generous with more? So getting back here to this Bible reading thing. The Bible is really mysterious for most of us because it contains weird names of weird places that we've never heard of and can't really quite fathom. And so when we read it, what we're often left to do is try to imagine the moral of the story. What's the moral of the story? And in so doing, what we do is we sort of take the stories of the Bible and we make them sort of akin to Aesop's fables or Grimm's fairy tales. Here's a tale, a myth, a legend, some bit of lore, and a far-off time, a far-off place that maybe reveals some sort of truth, some sort of way of living, some sort of top tip to not be a jerk, and to be a decent person. And then we kind of go, actually, I think I know how to be a decent person. I'm not sure I really need your stories that I don't understand anyway. So, thanks, but no thanks. Why am I supposed to spend time reading a book I don't understand to try to learn lessons that I feel like I already know? That's a waste of time. So I just started reading, and regardless of how you feel about this particular author, he's a powerful intellect, and he's an interesting thinker. So it's We Who Wrestle with God by Jordan Peterson. And I'm only just into it. And while Jordan Peterson offers some very interesting observations and understandings of some of the biblical stories, he really does approach it as an academic psychologist. And so he does what many do and sort of just reduces these stories of the Bible to sort of an Aesop's Fables or a Grimm's Fairy Tale or whatever else that just teach sort of moral stories or communicate some sort of transcendent truth. Again, that's not necessarily totally bad. What I'd like to do, though, is situate our understanding of these prophets in real time and real space, because these aren't just a collection of fairy tales and lore. This is real goings on in real places with real people who are really interacting with the God who is, both personally and socially. And so the stories aren't simply to tell us how to be nice. The stories are to reveal something about the God who is and how we relate with him. And so I want to be mindful of time, but you're going to get what you paid for. All right, let's go. All right? I'm not going to rip you all off. That's not how I roll. All right? Some of you are like, I don't give it up. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's not really that's not the point I'm trying to make. All right, so we often do this. I go through and say, hey, let's just go through the biblical narrative. And we're not going to go through exhaustively, but we're going to go quite quick, and then we're going to slow down. All right? Are you laughing at me? Or are you laughing at something else? Did I do something ridiculous? No, something else. Okay, great. All right, thank you. I got insecure for a moment, and I was like, oh no, what did I do? Yeah, I'm not insecure either. That was a lie. Anyway, so the biblical narrative, God creates everything and it's awesome. And then people screw up and it sucks. Right? And then when people screw up, violence fills the world. And so God says, all right, we need to cleanse this place. Here's the flood. Cleanses the earth. There's a few people who remain. Stuff starts over. People still suck. And they still do dumb stuff. And they continue to. And so God says, essentially, all right, we did the cleansing. It's like we kind of like baptized the whole world. We're going to do something different. I am going to work through people over time to redeem, restore, and recreate the stuff that was awesome but has become a bit junky. So he calls Abram, makes a promise to Abram, whose name changes to Abraham, right? That through him, God would work out this redemptive and recreative sort of program, if you will. Abraham, Isaac has Jacob. Jacob wrestles with God, and his name gets changed to Israel. And he has 12 sons who are called the 12 tribes of Israel, become the 12 tribes of Israel. These descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, eventually become enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. God liberates them from slavery through the ministry of Moses, brings them miraculously out of Egypt to the foot of Mount Sinai, and makes a covenant. Covenant is a sacred promise that God makes, of which we are beneficiaries. And God says, you're going to be my people, I'm going to be your God. But not just in a sort of like, I'm establishing a new religion. It's not so much that. It's almost like a marriage. So you know the 10 Commandments, have no other gods, right? Next commandment, like, don't make an image, right? Next commandment, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That doesn't mean that when I stub my toe, I shouldn't say GD. Although I shouldn't. But actually, it's not simply about carelessly speaking the name of God, though it does mean that. It's actually about like, no. If you are going to be my people called by my name, if you are taking my name upon you, that has to mean something in your life. The same way a married couple, when they take each other's name, like that has to mean something. You can't get married, take somebody's name, and then act like you're not married to them. That's a problem. We can all imagine what kind of problem that would bring about. And so don't take my name in vain. It's kind of God's way of saying, like, no, we're gonna be a thing. Like a real thing. And that needs to mean something. And so we come across in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last of the 5 books of Moses, the collection called the Torah, or the Law, right? And in chapter 28, God says, here's some certain blessings and curses. These are good things that are going to happen and bad things that are going to happen depending on how faithful you are to this relationship that we have and this law that I'm giving you to live by that's going to be good for you and good for others. Chapter 28, verse 1, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all nations on the earth. And all these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You'll be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land, and your young and your livestock, the calves of your herd and the lambs of your flocks. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed, and you will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, but flee from you in 7, and goes on to elaborate more on these blessings. However, verse 15, if you do not obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands and decrees I'm giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. You'll be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land, and the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. You'll be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke in everything you put your hand to, until you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him. Verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand, a fierce-looking nation without respect for the old or pity for the young. They will devour the young of your livestock and the crops and all these other sorts of things. And then, God promises something. Chapter 30, verse 1, when all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you. In other words, these blessings and curses, these aren't necessarily ifs, they're going to be whens. In other words, you're going to do well at times, and you're going to screw up. When that happens, and you take to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you. Verse 6, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. And so there's this promise of restoration. These 3 chapters in Deuteronomy ultimately underline, they are the foundation upon which the rest of the Old Testament is written and understood. Okay? And so what happens is we have what's called prophetic history. So interestingly, what we call historical books, which are the books that follow Deuteronomy, right, are Joshua, Judges. We throw Ruth in there because we deem it as historical. 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Esther. We throw Ruth and Esther in there because we see them as historical, whereas the Jewish organization keeps them in the writings. Because Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, and 1st, 2nd Kings are actually in the Jewish organization labeled as prophets. They're called the former prophets. Not as in they used to be prophets and now they're not. It's like the former versus the latter. And what we call the major and minor prophets, they call the latter prophets. And what these historical books do is they recall Israel's history, understand their present according to these chapters in Deuteronomy, actually according to the whole 5 books of Moses. Right? And so what we read in 1st and 2nd Kings is what happens as the nation of Israel is faithful to God or unfaithful to God. And as there's faithfulness, things go well. And you get like King David, and a bit of King Solomon, but he's a bit iffy. Right? And because he's a bit iffy, things go bad after him. There's a civil, not quite a civil war, but there's a split. And there's the southern kingdom of Judah, which is 2 of the tribes of Israel, and the northern kingdom of Israel, which is the other 10. And they set up different ways of worshiping, different kings. And you have some kings that are good and some kings that are not so good. And eventually, the northern kingdom of Israel is less faithful to the covenant. And so the Assyrians come and conquer them. The ancient empire of Assyria, you can go to the British Museum and see all about them. His capital city was Nineveh. Conquer the northern kingdom of Israel. Try to conquer the southern kingdom of Judah, but don't. Interestingly, because there's a very good king by the name of Hezekiah who's faithful to God. Right? And then the empire of Babylon. Sorry, I'm looking at it about my way. I should be looking at it your way. Here's like modern day Iraq. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's like Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine. So Assyria is like here and comes down and conquers. And then Babylon, the empire of Babylon. Again, go to the British Museum. Read and learn all about them. They conquer, and they eventually conquer the southern kingdom of Judah as well. And when the Israel and Judah are conquered, the people are exiled. They are deported, and this is how empires manage people and geography. Take people who live in an area and scatter them, and take people who live somewhere else and put them there, and just shake the whole thing up. Because if people who think alike and feel alike and believe alike can speak to one another and hang out with one another, then they have the ability to resist your power. But if you can shake them all up, disorient them, and make sure they can't talk and they can't hang out, and they have to be forced to interact with people with other belief systems and everything else like that, then they're confused and more easily governed. Well, anyway. And then eventually what happens is the Jewish people come back, the Persian Empire, Medo-Persian Empire conquers the Babylonians, and then eventually the Jewish people come back and they rebuild the temple, they reestablish the monarchy, but things aren't just quite right, but that's another sermon for another time. These 12 prophets, their names are Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. I'm going to make that joke until you're like, seriously, it's so, please stop. All right? These 12 prophets all have a ministry during this time period of the divided kingdom of Israel, where there's the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, all the way to when they return from exile. And their organization tells the story. Their organization tells a story. Just briefly as introduction. Hosea, we'll talk about him next week. He's told to marry a prostitute who's going to cheat on him, leave him, and then he's supposed to marry her again. That's crazy. You know when you're talking about morals of stories, we want to be careful, okay? Fellas, just saying. All right? There's a picture in that. It's the unfaithfulness of God's people to him. Joel talks about the day of the Lord. Amos, whose cookies are amazing, but that's another story. All right? Still about judgment, but about actually about Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. Obadiah is the shortest book of the Bible, actually lays into Edom, and the Edomites are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, his twin brother. So there's something there. Jonah, Nineveh, the Ninevites of this capital city of this empire of Assyria, they repent. They turn to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Micah, the destruction of Israel, but the preservation of Judah. Then Nahum, Nineveh's actual destruction. Are you seeing something? Real quick, Micah is the sixth of the 12 in order. Halfway through, Israel falls, Judah remains. Right in between there are prophets concerning Nineveh, the Assyrians. We're seeing actually the history of Israel and God's understanding of it and the people's understanding of it when they understand it like God being laid out. Not as morals of stories like fables and tales and lore, but God interacting with real people in real time, in real space. And it carries on through Judah's conquering, and everyone's coming back. Zechariah has to do it again with the day of the Lord. Interesting, the 2nd and 11th. So you talk about like organization, have to do with the day of the Lord. What's that? Has something to do with that. And then Malachi. Malachi, after everyone's returned, we're waiting for something. We're waiting for all of those promises of God restoring things, all the way back from Deuteronomy. Right? 1,500 or so years passing, and Malachi saying, we're back. But it's just not right yet. It's just not right yet. And so in the Christian organization of our Old Testament, Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. And what do we find? We find Matthew, and here comes Christ. Interestingly, in the Jewish organization of the Old Testament, the prophets end with Malachi as well, and then it goes to the writings. And often, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are the very next books that you read, which tell Israel's history from a more optimistic standpoint. And basically the same contents as 1st and 2nd Kings. They just are more optimistic about it rather than pessimistic. But here's the takeaway. You're like, Peter, what's this all about? Basically, I'm just trying to give us a summary of where we're heading. But what am I supposed to do with that, Peter? Well, here's one thing. Read your Bible. That'd be a good thing to do. Read 1st and 2nd Kings. Be like, man, there are names I can't pronounce. There's places I've got no idea. Peter, why on earth? Why would you do that to me? Why do you hate me? All right? Here's something you do. Read 1st and 2nd Kings. Because you're going to see some of those names and places and events pop back up as we go through the scroll of the 12. That'll be one thing. Second thing, and I think this is important. Perhaps you, like me, I have done this, have reduced the stories in the Bible to fables, myths, and lore they're just stories with morals to them. Or there's some sort of hidden spiritual secret knowledge. We've got to get the Bible code and unlock it because the people who know can see through back to the mysteries that are behind. And maybe you just need to Homer Simpson into the hedge, kind of like, maybe we're not going to do that so much anymore. We're going to find out what are these real stories of real people in real time and real space with the God who really is and how they're interacting. And perhaps, one step further, we all could realize that we live in real time, in real space, in a real place, and there's a real God who interacts with us interaction with our world. And perhaps we can move into a space where that's something that we can begin to comprehend differently, because we haven't relegated these stories to myth, legend, lore, fairy tale, or fable, but are having the courage to look at history and review it and consider not just the moral of the story, but the truth of the history. All right, so let's now we're going to stand, we're going to sing another song. Singing songs is praying. Have you ever seen Elf? Everyone can sing. Singing's just like talking. It's just moving your voice up and down. Singing these songs is praying. It's just we're moving our voice up and down and we're borrowing words from other people the same way we do when we do the Lord's Prayer or the Eucharistic prayer or confession or whatever else. So we're just going to stand. We're going to sing as a way of praying as we prepare for our time of confession.